You're on halfway between zero. I share stories that linger in the shadows, the kind that make you question what's real. Scared? Good. That's exactly where you should be. Stay close, or you might never leave. The backward god of the marsh. The old marsh beyond Harrow's Bend was a place locals pretended didn't exist. A drowned skeleton of pines and fog where stories outlasted the people who whispered them. I went there after my uncle died, mostly to clear his cabin and settle the estate, but also because he left me a message saying something still watched the water. The cabin sagged into the edge of the marsh, its windows blind with mildew. The smell of rot and old coins drifting from inside like the swamp was breathing. Uncle Maeve's journals were stacked in the main room, pages warped by humidity, filled with sketches of a figure drawn backward, always standing where the water thinned into silence. I spent the first night convincing myself he'd been losing grip, but the marsh hummed under the floorboards, as if his drawings were only an attempt to describe something real. Outside, the tree line bent the wrong way when the wind moved, not against the gust but away from the deeper water, like the trees were afraid of something rising. The second evening I walked the boardwalk, each plank groaning under me, and felt eyes track my steps from beneath the surface, despite seeing nothing but mud-black water. At the far end, a shape moved with a stuttering gait, shoulders rolling backward, head crooked. Every step the wrong direction, like the world wasn't built for its anatomy. I froze, watching it blur through the fog, not approaching but somehow closing the distance, its movements rewinding in small loops as if time resisted its presence. When I returned to the cabin, Uncle Maeve's journals had rearranged into a perfect circle on the table, the pages open to sketches I hadn't seen before. Every drawing showed the same figure, but each was worse, as if its body was learning new ways to fold itself, studying how to mimic whatever watched the marsh. Night pulled the cabin into silence, the electricity failing with a soft gasp, leaving only the swamp outside breathing through the cracks in the walls. Something scraped along the boards under the window, not claws but elbows, dragging itself as though it had learned to move, using whichever joint bent most efficiently. I didn't open the blinds, but a silhouette pressed against them, its outline wrong, its head rotating backward until the neck creaked like a drying rope. I heard my uncle's voice whisper my name, faint but certain, coming from the thing outside, repeating it in a rhythm too steady to belong to the living. The blinds fluttered inward, not pushed by wind, but pulled by breath, a cold exhale brushing my cheek, even though the window remained locked. I backed away until I hit the journals, one sliding open to reveal a page written in a hand shaking hard enough to tear the paper. He wrote that the backward god wasn't a spirit or creature, but a pattern, a memory the marsh forced onto anything that lingered long enough to listen. He'd studied its behavior and believed it rewrote the living by showing them the shape they would become, folding people into silhouettes that walked the wrong direction. The cabin groaned as though something heavy pressed a palm against the outer wall, testing the wood as it whispered my name using my uncle's voice again. I couldn't stay inside, not while it knew me, so I grabbed a lantern and pushed into the fog where the marsh swallowed sound like a hungry mouth. The path ahead glimmered with shallow pools, each reflecting me at a half-second delay, as though my reflection didn't agree on what I should look like. Somewhere deeper in the marsh, a splash echoed backward, the sound stretching in reverse like a recording winding up before the event actually happened. The fog thinned enough for me to see that the boardwalk ahead had been pulled apart, each plank lifted neatly and stacked on the bank like an offering. Beyond the broken boards, footprints led across the mud, but each print faced the wrong way, heel forward, toes behind, guiding me toward a hollow of whispering reeds. The reeds swayed in a rhythm that didn't match the air, crossing and uncrossing like ribs flexing around a breath, revealing a narrow opening shaped exactly my height. Inside the hollow, lantern light trembled over wet bark and old bones, each skull etched with the same symbol, a circle broken by a backward-leaning line. Something waited at the far end, not moving, only adjusting its posture in small, unnatural increments, as though aligning itself with the version of me it wanted. When it stood fully still, I noticed its spine protruded outward in the same crooked shape. My reflection had shown only minutes before. It lifted its head, joints clicking, and I saw its face wasn't a face at all, but a pale surface that reshaped itself each second, learning how I might look tomorrow. The marsh behind me tightened with silence, every frog and insect falling quiet as though the swamp inhaled, preparing for something irreversible. I stepped back, but the ground shifted, not sinking but rising, as if the marsh pushed me toward the thing that already knew the shape of my future. The creature moved for the first time, not forward but backward, drawing closer by retreating, its feet dragging through mud like it walked on the memory of footsteps. I felt the shift before I heard it, the world around me dimming, the sound of my heartbeat echoing in reverse, each thump rewinding into the last. The creature reached toward me with an arm bending the wrong way, its fingers aligning perfectly with the shadow I cast behind me. My shadow moved independently, stretching toward it, merging with its outline until I felt a cold tug deep inside my ribs, like something essential was unthreading. Light flickered as the lantern sputtered. In that strobe, I saw the creature's form melt into something closer to human, closer to me, closer than I wanted to see. It was whispered once more in my uncle's voice, but the words weren't my name now. They were instructions, echoes of a shape I wasn't supposed to hear. I dropped the lantern and ran, not caring where the path led, only knowing that behind me the creature followed by retreating, closing the distance with its impossible steps. The cabin's glow appeared through the trees, but the windows now showed silhouettes moving inside, each one a different version of me, walking backward in slow, deliberate loops. When I reached the steps, the door opened on its own, not welcoming me but revealing the marsh behind me reflected perfectly inside the room. Something had rewritten the space, folding the cabin into the shape the backward god required, turning it into a mouth that waited for me to choose to enter. I backed away, and the marsh responded by inhaling again, drawing the fog inward with a pull strong enough to rattle the boards under my feet. Behind me, footsteps approached, backward and rhythmic, keeping pace with my retreat, mirroring the shape I was already becoming. I understood then why my uncle's final journal page ended mid-sentence, smudged by something that twisted his hand as he wrote. No one escaped the backward god by running. They escaped only by forgetting the shape it gave them, refusing to walk the path it laid in reverse. But the marsh remembers what we tried to forget, and I felt its memory settle into my spine as my shadow bent the wrong way under the moon. I don't know if I made it out, or if the marsh simply let me imagine an exit, because every mirror since then hesitates before showing my reflection, and sometimes, late at night, when the world feels slightly tilted, I hear footsteps approaching in reverse, reminding me that something still walks the marsh using my shape now. If you're listening to this, remember the stories you trust most usually come from places that shouldn't exist, and some truths keep following long after the tale ends. And if you ever find yourself near Harrow's Bend, don't look into the water too long, because the backward god has already learned your outline by now. If you're still here, stay aware. And maybe subscribe. Sometimes it helps to be remembered by something that isn't watching from the marsh. The old woman who collects last footsteps. Every town has shadows that linger long after the streetlights flicker out. In Eldenbrook, one figure moves silently, gathering remnants of steps no one else remembers. Thomas ran through the fogged streets, market shutters closed, his breath thick in the cold night. Every footfall felt heavier than the last, echoing unnaturally behind him. A hunched silhouette emerged at the street's far end, dragging a wicker basket that seemed impossibly heavy. Mist curled around her like fingers brushing against his ankles. The children spoke of her, a figure older than memory, who collected last footsteps. T had laughed at stories, but now laughter felt wrong in the pressing fog. Each step he took drew a whisper from the shadows, a reply to his movement, faint and trembling like someone unseen walking just ahead of him. He froze, the air thickened, and for a heartbeat, the figure's shadow stretched unnaturally, as if tethered to him by something unseen and deliberate. "You drop them," she croaked, her voice brittle and dry, scraping against his ears like leaves over stone. "Every last step falls into my basket." Thomas stepped back, fog coiling at his feet. What do you mean?" he asked, voice trembling, but the question only seemed to satisfy her curiosity. The basket shifted, revealing shapes like glowing embers, faint impressions of steps suspended in the mist. They pulsed softly, each one alive with distant memory. He realized then the stories were true. The footsteps of the lost, the vanished, the quiet dead, were real, kept by someone who moved through time differently. She leaned closer, pale eyes reflecting dim lamplight. "Every step has a sound. Every sound has a keeper. I am the last," she whispered, and the fog seemed to shiver. Thomas tried to run, but the streets twisted underfoot, corners stretching impossibly long, alleys narrowing. Every direction felt wrong, as though the village had a memory of him. The basket tipped slightly, spilling fragments that danced and hissed like small, frightened spirits. He recognized one, a childhood friend who disappeared into the forest years ago. Another belonged to the grocer who died quietly, leaving unpaid debts and unspoken apologies. The echoes of their last walks shimmered, visible only in the mist's faint glow. She beckoned, slow and deliberate, and Thomas felt his body obey, drawn forward despite his terror. The echoes swirled, overlapping, a chorus only he could hear. "Come closer. Let me show you the last ones you haven't noticed," she said. And the mist carried her words, like a weight pressing against his chest. With each step toward her, the street multiplied into infinite paths, footsteps layering over one another, a labyrinth of memory and loss folding in on itself. T stumbled over something unseen, the basket tipping further. The spilled fragments screamed softly, mournfully, fading as she gathered them back with uncanny precision. "They run when you interfere. No one should hear them twice. They are private, sacred, forgotten," she murmured, and the echoes whispered their quiet agreement. The cold pressed deeper into his bones, yet there was comfort in her presence, a dark warning wrapped in familiarity. Thomas understood fear and reverence mingling for the first time. "You will drop your last step one day," she said, voice brushing against him like wind through dead branches. "I will be waiting, always." She receded into the fog, basket vanishing, leaving only a faint shimmer and the sense of eyes pressed against the back of his skull. Thomas ran blindly, streets twisting, alleys unfamiliar, shadows alive with collected echoes. He could no longer tell his steps from the ones she had claimed. Reaching home, he checked the floorboards. Nothing, yet, in the corner. Faint moonlight glimmered across a single footprint, already claimed by her unseen hand. Night after night, he listened for the steps he had yet to take, the rhythm of a quiet chorus waiting for him to drop his last one. The echoes of Elden Brook followed him everywhere, a reminder that someone, somewhere, remembered every forgotten footfall. collecting what the world had left behind. He glimpsed movement in the corner of his eye, but it was only fog, only memory, only the persistent weight of being watched by footsteps, not his own. Every journey, even the simplest walk, carried her attention. Each step was part of a pattern he could not escape, a quiet tally kept by a relentless collector. Even when sunlight returned, he could feel the whispers beneath his own stride, the residual hum of past steps pressing against the soles of his feet. Ati's dreams were filled with echoes, corridors of unseen people walking paths he had never taken. Guided by her, unseen, always present. Thomas realized the village itself was a container, each building a vessel for the stored steps. The fog a veil between what had been and what had yet to fall. No one spoke of her directly. To mention her was to invite her attention, to risk adding one's own last step to the collection. Yet, in every creaking floorboard, every rustle of leaves in the wind, he felt her presence, quiet and patient, waiting for him to leave his final mark. And so he walks cautiously, forever counting, forever aware. Each step a conversation with a woman who gathers what remains when life ends, unseen but always watching. The night the sky opened sideways. The wind had a strange weight that night, pressing against rooftops like a living thing. In East Hollow, no one remembered weather so thick, so wrong. Marcus had stayed too long at the riverbank, notebook in hand, scribbling nonsense he couldn't explain. The sky seemed tilted, like gravity had lost patience. The first crack split the horizon, a sharp line that wasn't thunder or lightning. It ran horizontally, stretching farther than his eyes could follow. Birds went silent. Even the river slowed, reflecting the split in the sky as if it had forgotten how to flow. A deep hum rose from the horizon, vibrating through bones, vibrating through thoughts. Marcus swore he felt it in his stomach, in his chest, in his skull. People began shouting from their homes, windows thrown open, faces pressed to glass. But the hum drowned human sound, bending it into something unrecognizable. He stumbled back, notebook clattering into the mud. The crack widened, edges flickering with violet fire, light bending sideways across the treetops. The ground trembled. Sidewalks shifted slightly, as if the world beneath him had loosened, preparing to tip sideways into the sky. Shadows didn't fall right. Trees stretched unnaturally, branches bending toward the crack, and Marcus felt nausea clawing at him. Something was wrong in a way no explanation could reach. From the slit, shapes emerged. They weren't clouds, not birds, not smoke, flickered like broken glass, twisted forms moving against physics itself. People screamed. Some ran blindly, some froze, faces slack, unable to comprehend the impossible spectacle overhead. Marcus backed into the riverbank, eyes wide. The shapes above seemed to notice him, trailing lines of light like fingers pointing directly at his chest. One shape detached, falling sideways through the air, not down, not toward him. Sideways, it twisted mid-fall, like gravity had forgotten the rules entirely. He blinked. When his eyes opened, the river itself seemed to flow sideways, water climbing the banks and dripping from the trees. The hum intensified. It wasn't sound anymore, it was thought. It pressed into his mind, whispering truths he didn't want, secrets he couldn't repeat. Marcus tried to run. Streets warped. Every direction twisted, skewed, and he realized his body was no longer moving the way he intended. Windows shattered without reason. Objects slid across surfaces, sideways, as if caught in some invisible wind that ignored normal physics. He caught movement in a cornered neighbor's dog, running sideways, limbs stretching unnaturally, eyes wider than possible, slit stopped abruptly, turned its head toward him. Fear made him stumble, mud coating his hands and knees. He felt the world bending, the sky not just above, but around him, closing in with intent. A loud crack split the air. The slit widened further, and Marcus glimpsed landscapes inside it. Possible cities, floating mountains, rivers running upside down. He screamed. Not out of pain, but because the mind could not process geometry that refused to obey its rules, shapes that shouldn't exist in reality. A finger of light reached toward him, sideways, brushing his shoulder. He fell, rolled into the mud, the hum drilling through his skull, replaying every memory he didn't know he had. The slit began to collapse inward, sucking clouds, birds, roofs, and his notebook toward it. Everything was sideways, everything was wrong, and yet precise in some alien order. Marcus felt his own weight shift. He stumbled, arms flailing, aware he was not fully touching the ground, as if his body was being rewritten in response to the twisted sky. The night became silent suddenly. No hum, no crack, only the residual vibration in his bones, whispering of places no human was meant to know. When he dared to lift his head, the slit had vanished. Sky was intact again, ordinary clouds drifting lazily, stars shining faintly through the mist. Neighbors came out. They murmured about hearing a hum, seeing shapes, feeling the world tilt. No one mentioned sideways, the things they couldn't describe, the truths their minds had refused. Marcus never touched the riverbank again. His notebook stayed on the shelf, pages warped, words scribbled sideways, sentences unfinished. Even years later, when wind pressed oddly against the eaves, he felt the sideways sky bending toward him, remembering, waiting, whispering secrets the world forgot. Sleep brought dreams of geometry that broke laws, creatures that walked at impossible angles, and the hum replaying itself in ways that made him sit upright, gasping. He swore under his breath one night, alone in his room, that he would never speak of what he had seen, but the urge to write, to warn, never left him. Sometimes, looking at the horizon, he sees a flicker, a slanted crack, a sideways hum calling softly. It's waiting for him to step outside once more.